During the Xbox presentation, Atlus made an appearance and they announced that Persona 3 Portable, Persona 4 Golden, and Persona 5 Royal are going to make their way to other platforms such as PC, console, Switch, and all that good stuff, which, first of all, is fantastic news. This is the sort of stuff we have been asking Atlus for ages, so I really like to see that. However, as much as I am excited for Persona 4 and 5, I can't help but feel mixed about Persona 3. Don't get me wrong, I really like parts of it. I think the music is great. Clearly, Atlus have always put a lot of focus to the score of the game, and I really appreciate it. The story and the characters, again, it's great. It's pretty much the only reason why I even pushed myself through it, because at times I felt like I was going insane with the amount of grinding I was doing, but I digress. The gameplay side is honestly the only thing that is not up to par, but to give credit where credit is due, a lot of these issues, if not all of them, have been addressed by Atlus in further titles. My biggest criticism is that you cannot control your teammates. Aside from the small selection of tactics that sort of dictate their aggression, basically meaning they either focus more on attack or more on support, so in other words they are essentially doing whatever the fuck they want, and this has made for some painful drags through the dungeons of the game, especially on bosses. The amount of times I would see characters spam the same ability over and over and over again, never resulting in nothing, made me want to Persona 3 myself out of existence. This is me saying this without even mentioning the fact that regular attacks seem to miss most of the time, like everyone in Cease was fighting blindfolded or something. If I had a pound for every time I saw Mitsuru cast Marin Karen and fail, I'd be a billionaire by now. On the topic of combat, Tartarus is also a pretty big issue for me in this game. If you're unfamiliar with Persona 3, Tartarus is what the dungeons are called in the game, a location that you visit during the so-called dark hour, which also happens to be the school you attend to. In Tartarus, you essentially are always looking for stairs to advance to the next room, with the game consisting of 263 floors with an additional 10 that are optional. This, for me, was a huge drag, once again. For one, if you reach far enough, you'll reach a block, and you cannot advance further until you reach to a further point in the story, which is when you go through a full moon in the game. As you walk through, you will see enemies walking about, and if they spot you, they will chase after you, and the controls are not the greatest, with the sometimes tiny areas to maneuver around. It pretty much means you are forced to fight them, even if you don't want to. Another thing in Tartarus is the fact that you can only get a checkpoint, or known as the teleporter, only on certain floors. Basically, whenever there is a boss on the floor, but I think there are a couple exceptions with the first block. The purpose of this teleport is to get you to the bottom floor and replenish your health and MP. This starts out relatively fine, but the longer you play and the further you get, you realize that the gap between checkpoints only grows apart to the point where it reaches gaps of more than 10, which really hammers down on the amount of farming you do in the game, as you can't go to the last floor where you went to where the enemies give the most XP. You have to climb your way back up all the way again if you decide to come back on a later day. You might be thinking, why can't you just stay as long as you want? Similar to what happens in Mementos from Persona 5. Well, the party members, including yourself, can get the tired status on them, meaning you get a bunch of debuffs like more chance to miss, reducing the damage you do, and some others, which is not really what I want to go through when I'm just trying to farm for some XP. To give the game some credit, I will say that this isn't much of a problem late game, as your chance of getting the tired status is tied to the stats of the team as far as I am aware, because I don't remember ever getting it during the midway to late game portion, but it's still a pretty bad setback early on. On the topic of farming, I thought the level progression in this game was pretty damn slow, if I'm being honest. It was already tiring enough, but it's also a bit luck-based, but I'll get onto that in a little bit. Getting the party members all to a reasonable level was already time-consuming enough, but if you actually wanted everyone in the group to level with each other, it would take forever, so I didn't even bother, and it made things even more difficult for me late game. I felt that the bosses were really cheap, especially the late game ones, as they pretty much had no weaknesses, and were resistant to everything and often paired up with other enemies. I mean, what is this? Train and null on everything except on Pierce and Almighty? Why? This is why I struggled so much, because the characters I chose didn't do pierce, and Almighty is expensive as shit to cast, so basically it required me to grind the fuck out of the other characters that can do pierce to actually work well on this boss, and this is just one instance out of many. Also, sometimes you can go to a floor and your teammates will be randomly spawned around the whole floor, and then you have to go find them, which admittedly, it's not the worst thing in the world, but it can be very inconvenient at times when you're just trying to do something, or when you are on low health and just trying to get back to the next teleport so you can recover. It was cool the first couple of times, I will admit, but then it kind of just makes you eye roll. Glad that was not brought back in the further titles. Shuffle time given out mostly shite when it is the main source of everything that you acquire in Tartarus is the main reason why it took me so long to level up. It's because you need to get lucky enough to get a card that increases the amount of experience you get. Depending on the level of the card, you can either get a lot of XP or just a little boost. Not only that, the cards get shuffled well fast towards the later part of the game. They also get turned over to the backside, so even if you get in a rotation, you can miss out on it if you lose track of where it was. Everything that I mentioned so far wouldn't be so bad if you could just retry from the floor you're on, or even the battle itself, but unfortunately the game doesn't work like that. It puts you back to the main menu every time you die, meaning you can lose a lot of progress, which can get very annoying, and it happened to me a lot. Last point that I want to touch on, it's not that bad, but it's the social link system. I found it weird that whenever you reached a certain level with a girl, you would automatically be put in a relationship with them. I don't really know why it wasn't an option, like in the later games, and then if you don't speak to them for a bit, they get annoyed at you, and then you have to try and regain that social link. To me, it was just a weird design choice. Didn't take much away from the game, but I figured it's still worth knowing, because eventually it's going to happen in your game if you invest enough time in going far enough with the characters. Those were just some of my thoughts and opinions on playing for it. Overall, I would still actually say it was a pretty enjoyable experience because the story really gripped me and the characters were really good. So that portion of the game saved it for me, but it's a shame that it had a lot of annoying aspects. But then again, it is an older title, so I can give it a little bit more of forgiveness for the fact that it is old and they basically learned from all of it in the future titles. But now, I have another chance to play it since the game is getting a re-release to Steam. I'm willing to give it another shot. Having more experience playing for it once, I feel like it would be much easier to go for it a second time, and I might even change some of my opinions on what I found annoying about the game. But until then, I'll see you guys in the next video. Bye!